Can I just say one thing about rehabilitation post-operatively,
Yeah.
uh, with respect to SIMS and also with respect to pain-guided movement and with respect to relative motion, um, the idea of relative motion splinting. I think um, all three of these therapies or modes of therapy steer clear of the fact that of the principle that we should operate and we should leave things to recover for long periods of time. And then only once things are healed should we start to mobilize. So without doubt, early mobilization is key for edema control, is key for brain-hand interaction. It is key to get normal patterns of movement back rather than allowing patients to go away, develop abnormal patterns, and then try and unlearn those patterns. Um, Once again, there's no, and this is where I think the problems come in, is that the evidence is there and it hasn't been collaborated in an effective way from a rehabilitation perspective to say that early active mobilization, and that's why the dogma of casting, or not casting people, but splinting people and splinting patients for such long periods of time has just kind of continued forever and ever. But I think, Wendell Merritt's group with relative motion, the ideas of pain-controlled motion, and your technique of SIMS certainly has brought about a thing where therapy doesn't stop when you leave the therapist's door. Therapy is every single day, every single minute, every single time. And that's what SIMS allows, that's what relative motion allows, and that's what pain-controlled motion allows. But it has to be with guidance, and it has to be with a one-on-one guidance between the therapist and the surgeon and the patient, which is why at day one, I always expose my wounds and I always just try, whether I'm doing a zone 2 flexor repair or whether I'm doing I try as soon as possible. Well, if it's a zone 2, I may just wait 3 days, elevate the limb and tell the patient to elevate the limb, but see me at day 3 and then in my office, tell that patient to then show them what is a third of a fist, what is a half a fist, and what's a full fist. And then let them, under my guidance, do that initial motion. Because if I'm afraid I'm going to snap the tendon at day 3, then it stands to reason that I'm going to snap that tendon anytime I move it. So if I haven't repaired it properly, it is the surgeon's fault. It is, in my mind, just about never the patient's or the therapist's fault that the tendon has snapped. Because if you've done an adequate repair, other than patients who would deliberately go and rupture your tendon by doing something silly, if you just spoke to that patient, told them what it's about, and told them how to actually protect that tendon, then guided protected motion is actually very, very good and helpful to healing. And I think your SIMS technique has, certainly in my hands, has its very good indications and extremely good at getting brain hand patterning back together and allowing, despite the fact that you think you're immobilizing joints that are good, it allows support to those joints so that those joints that are stiff are then isolated, and that patient can, in a supportive environment, start to move those very joints that you need moved. As opposed to this thought process of, well, you're taking a good joint and you're making a bad joint. I don't think you are. And secondly, just because you're using plaster of Paris is breathable, it is a natural fiber, and it is, for wound healing, in my opinion, much better than any fiberglass or any plastic material that you could make a splint out of. So both from a wound healing perspective and a edema control perspective and a brain hand coordination perspective, the actual casting, and therefore it's not just a back slab, it's a full cast, gives you that intuitive feedback each time you make a maneuver. And I think that really helps.
Thank you so much, Chetan. I think Absolutely, it's non-removable, which means that the patient has to work with it and work within it. And we don't need to worry about the wounds, because for millennia, patients have been put into plaster of Paris with wounds. So there's no limitation with this technique, and it just highlights that the sooner we put them in that plaster of Paris cast, the better, because they may only then be in it for 2 weeks versus waiting down the line. Chronic stiffness is now present, persistent edema is there, now they need to be in a cast for a long period of time. And I think especially when you've got changing anatomy, when you've taken a toe and you've put it on a hand, you've got to get that patient to accept that that toe is now a thumb. And that is something that is happening on a cognitive level. It's not something that's going to work because you put the toe on the thumb and it's now post. It has to, the same with the tendon transfer. You know, it's the same with the replantation and any any kind of nerve damage. You have to connect the brain, and that is the secret, and that is the key. And the secret for therapists is to educate their surgeons, being open, discussing it, and taking the ideas to their surgeons so that everybody's on board. Because if you just do it and the patient arrives in the surgeon's office with a cast and he has no idea about the technique or what you're thinking or what you're doing, they are going to be upset or not understand it. And we want the patient to feel the confidence from the surgeon. If the surgeon says to the patient, you have got to use this technique, and I'm sending you to the therapist for this technique, they arrive half the battles won for us. So it just really highlights our teamwork. So thank you so much for reiterating that to the therapist, because you're going to give them inspiration to go and tackle the issue with their surgeons. Because although it's not a new technique, it's just not a popular technique for many reasons. And we're going to change that just through the beauty and the power of social media and through webinars like this. Thank you so much, Chetan, for supporting the technique.
Pleasure. Thank you, Robin.